Kideo Go presents Genius Insight, Cross-Cultural Influences with Dr. Milan Lebray. It takes all kinds to make the world go round, making us all unique, important, and special in our own way. Diversity is just one of the beauties of the human condition. Author Stephen Covey once said, "Strength lies in differences, not similarities," and I agree. But if we're all so exceptional, how do marketers appeal to the nearly 7.8 billion people worldwide? The key to successful or persuasive cross-cultural marketing is to develop awareness, tolerance, and respect for our differences. Let's start out this episode of Genius Insight by understanding that most cultures fall into one of two groups. There are high-context cultures, also referred to as collectivism, or low-context cultures, also known as individualism. High-context cultures or collective cultures are countries like Japan, Korea, and China. Low-context cultures or individual cultures are countries like the United States, Germany, and Australia. As you can imagine, there are fundamental differences in how low and high-context cultures make requests. This is where good marketers and persuasive people shine. When someone understands how people from other countries communicate, they are more successful at getting them to say yes, and also avoiding unnecessary conflict. So what is the approach? Well, in an individual or low-context culture, the key is to point out what the person has done previously. These cultures tend to respond to requests based on personal commitments and what someone has done in their past as an individual. Individual cultures, like Americans, cut to the chase. They tend to only provide relevant details without always considering how their message will be received. Low-context communication is usually efficient and concise, typically ignoring the relationship with the message receiver. Generally, low-context cultures tend to have more difficulty understanding complex messaging because they prefer explicit task-related information. In a collective culture or high-context culture, the key is to point out what the peer group has done in the past. These cultures tend to respond to language that provides social proof for their actions. Collective cultures tend to be more responsive and provide more feedback when communicating. Through their language, they let the receiver know that they are trying to nurture the relationship with you. As a general rule, they tend to gravitate toward more symbolic, artful language that is implicit. Here are some examples. "Mary, you have been so helpful in the past. I'm hoping that you will provide updated information again." This is an example of individual or low-context communication. Next example. "Junho, you and your workers have been so helpful in the past. It was a pleasure working with your team. I'm hoping that you can provide us with the updated information again." This is communication for collective or high-context cultures. Big brands such as Nike, Coca-Cola, Wendy's, Apple, Best Buy, etc. are all global merchandisers and marketers. But even though some of these iconic brands made it overseas, their US persuasive style of messaging has not always been well received, resulting in brands like Best Buy and Wendy's being, international failures. So as new brands travel, they must adapt their messaging to their new market or end up on the next plane home. The foundational principles behind individualism and collectivism don't just create marketing issues, they may also be at the heart of some of the most significant problems in the United States. Some of the fundamentals behind how these two different styles, individualism and collectivism, approach each other can create separation from family, friends, neighbors, and communities. If we only view life through our own high or low context lens, it can be a pretty narrow scope when looking at a vast world. For people in places like the US, everything from abortion, guns, LGBTQ rights, to whether or not to wear a mask during a pandemic may all boil down to this question. Does an individual life belong to themselves, or does it belong to the group, public, or government? It isn't a simple answer because, from the perspective of individualism, an individual life belongs to him or herself along with the inalienable right to live as they see fit. They have the right to act on their own judgment, to keep and use the products of its effort to pursue the values of his choosing. Conversely, collectivism believes in the idea that the individual life belongs not to him, but to the group or society of which he is merely a part, and that he has no right, and that he must sacrifice his value and goal for the group's greater good. But there's something to consider. No one person or culture operates entirely in the principles of individualism or collectivism. Many of us tend to have some characteristics outside our cultural structure, especially if you've traveled a lot or lived overseas. But regardless of the number of passport stamps you may have or how you were raised, we have a strong propensity towards one over the other. As such, it is essential to have awareness, understanding, and respect for each other's differences, as it will lead you to be more effective in the art of persuasion. And, as a bonus, if you act now, you'll also be a decent, compassionate, more tolerant human being. Stopping to reflect on why a person responds in a certain way can leverage trying to persuade them and make you a more effective communicator. However, this is a challenge because, as you've learned, we are bombarded by an outrageous number of opinions and information that tends to side us with, or at least lean us towards, the belief structure that we already have. So to be part of the world of successful persuaders requires one to be present and mindful, while also reading cultural types, communication styles, body language, and social cues. Yes, it takes a lot to navigate life, much less get people to say yes. But with the tactics you've learned this term, you now have more genius insight. So go on, face the world. You are ready to fight the influence and be a positive, persuasive change maker. So let's do a quick review. In an individual, low-context culture, the key is to point out what the person has done previously. These cultures tend to respond to requests based on personal commitment and what someone has done in the past as an individual. Individual cultures, like Americans, cut to the chase. They tend to only provide relevant details without always considering how the message is being received. In a high-context culture, the key is to point out what the peer group has done in the past. These cultures tend to respond to language that provides social proof for their actions. Collective cultures tend to be more responsive and provide more feedback when communicating. Through their language, they let the receiver know that they're trying to nurture their relationship with you. As a general rule, they tend to gravitate toward more symbolic, artful language that is implicit. So that's all for this episode. If you'd like to see more content like this, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next Genius Insight. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.